Hi there, my name is Wee Tran. Welcome back to Animation Teacher. Today's assignment is for the ARM build animation assignment, and we'll be using basic bone deformers to create an arm and to animate them using three different animation uh, techniques or processes. So I'm just going to start up Harmony 15 here, and I'll name this just for my Seneca students, this is your class letter underscore last name underscore first name, and we'll put week02, and we'll create our scene. Now while this loads up, you can actually have video tutorials down here. Just clicked on that link there. Lots of useful tutorials for Harmony 15. Alright, so let's get started. The first thing I want to review is ensure that your preferences are set. So under the General tab, we want to make sure the focus on mouse enter. Default separate position for pegs is set on. Stop motion keyframes is set on. And the levels of undo is at 300. Under the Advanced tab, you'll want to have support overlay underlay arts. Okay. Now, if you're watching this video, this first part is going to be about rigging a basic arm. If you want to skip ahead to probably about the midway point or a little past the midway point, we'll actually get into the animation section. Alright, so first thing, to create a new arm, to create any new assets, it's a good idea to create a scene palette for your character or your rig. So in this case, my new palette name will be called ArmBuild. Okay, you can put a space bar, it'll underscore it. And under here, I'm going to double click. Let's do some bright green, and I'm going to call this Sketch. I'll create a couple of more swatches here. So for this one, I am going to create a arm outline. I'll make this a dark blue, and I'm going to make a arm fill. I'll do a lighter blue. I'm going to do a hand. Actually, we'll do an arm fill 2, and we'll do a purple-ish, yeah, and we'll do a hand outline, okay, and then I'm going to do a hand fill. Now you'll notice the alpha is set to 255. That's the equivalent of 100%. And if you want a halfway point, then it's about 120 something, 130. But for this case, we'll do full on fill. Alright, actually, let's change my sketch color to red. Now you can always change your color as you go. That's the nice thing about having these palettes. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to sketch out something. You can use a brush or a pen tool at this point. I'm just going to use a pen tool or a pencil tool. And for my workspace, I'm currently on animating workspace. So if you want to follow along like I have, just set it to animating. Alright, so I'm going to sketch out something fairly simple here. So it's going to be an arm with a sleeve, and then I'll do a hand. Okay, I'm feeling fancy now. I'm going to do 5-finger hands. Alright, so once you have your sketch, what you want to do is go over to the node view, or you can do it on the timeline view, and we're going to create 2 new drawings. So if you're on the timeline, you just have to go to drawing or hit Control R, and I'm going to type down arm. I'm going to add and close, and then that's going to give me this arm here. You can also go add again, and it's going to just keep this properties window up so you can create a bunch of new art. So if I did a hand, then I add, it's going to give me it, and then it's going to keep this dialog box up. So for example, I'm going to hit hand, and when I hit add, it's going to keep the dialog box up, so I can do an infinite amount here. But because I'm done, I'm just going to close it. So now I have my arm and my hand. I'm going to go ahead and clean up the arm first. So to clean up, I'm going to use the rectangle tool, and under tool properties, I'm going to crank up the size to about 9.6 just because I feel like it. So I'm going to use the arm outline, and I'm going to create a square. And using 1s and 2s, you're zooming in and out, and the space bar is going to allow you to pan. Next, whoops. Alright, so you see it disappearing. It's because the art only exists on frame 1. Okay, past frame 1, it doesn't exist anymore. We'll continue on with the explanation of how to extend that in a few moments. So to clean up, once again, we're using the contour editor tool. Now if you just circle select, you can grab these vertice points, these points here, and you can, using the combination of Alt, you can drag and slide your points across to get a nice little curve. And you're controlling both sides of the vertice. If you want to control only the one side, just hold down Alt while you just drag one of the handles. Okay. Now, if you want to create an intersecting point like so, you can do one of two things. You can draw a line straight down like so. Use the select tool, select these 2 points, because if you don't select it, you're only going to grab the one here, and then you're going to go over to the tool properties and flatten the image. So with that, next time you select it, these 2 points are now intersecting. They're flattened on top, and therefore they cause an intersecting line, which then you can circle and delete the points. Okay, now I'm going to hit undo a couple of times, and I'll show you the other way to do it. Okay, so the other way to create a point, an intersecting point, is to create a couple of extra vertical points here. Extra points here, and you're just going to click and drag and pull your vertice up. So when you do it like this, you don't have to flatten it because it's already part of the flattened artwork. So that creates your point there. And then you can just simply drag that over and delete the extra points. Now you're always going to get some extra nubs that you might not want, like this. So you can just circle select and delete it that way. If you don't want this center point, you can also delete it like so. And then you can delete this also if you want, and that as well, just to keep your drawings clean. The idea is that the fewer points you have, the easier it is to manipulate your art, like I am doing right now. And when you get into production, it helps the pipeline along, so whoever gets to your artwork can manipulate it any way they want. Now, just a couple of features that you can play with. Once you have your arm drawn, you can go ahead and increase the size of the stroke. Now let's say you wanted only a part of this with thick lines. You can just hold this down under the contour editor and find the pencil editor, and when I select it now, you'll see that I have 3 sets of points here. If I want to add more points, I can hold down Control and click, and when I do that, I can basically circle select a point, and using the up and down arrow key, I can create a thicker and thinner line like so. Okay, so I find that a little bit much, so I'm just going to tone it down. You can also just select the one side. Okay, so you can play around with that for now. Once I have everything set the way I want it, I can fill it with my arm fill and my arm fill too. If you find that for some reason or another you can't fill, you might want to check a couple of things. Just make sure the connection point is closed off, because sometimes when you're drawing a circle, for example, and you don't quite reach the edge and you try to fill it, well, in that case it filled. But there's actually a gap here. And depending on how you have this, right now I have closed large gaps. If I set it to close no gaps, it may not fill the circle because of this. Actually, there's a stroke here. So let's suppose that stroke wasn't there and I tried to fill it. It's not going to fill unless I close that stroke or I set it to close large gaps. So it's important to be as clean with your drawing as possible so that you can fix, so you can fill your drawings readily and easily. Now we're going to move on to cleaning up the hand. So with the hand selected, I'm going to start cleaning up using, again, the rectangle tool. And I will use my hand outline. It's actually hard to see. Let's change the hand outline color to brown. Using my contour editor tool, I'm going to start creating additional points by holding Control and clicking. So I'm creating a bunch of points here that I'm going to need to manipulate. Now, to do cross sections like this, all you have to do is do that, just across. Okay, so that's important for fingertips. So I'm going to do this again. Basically, you're going to do 2 lines like that, another line in the middle, and just cross it like that. And then you delete the extra points. I'll do it one more time. Okay, cross section, point, and up, and delete. Okay, so that'll create your fingers. And I'll do it one last time actually here because I want to overlap my index finger with my thumb. There you go. So now I have my hand and I am ready to adjust the points here. Now you want to make sure when you are drawing the wrist area to try to visualize a circle. When we get to more complex rig building, I'm going to get you guys to actually draw the circle within the hand. But for now, for this video, I'm just going to create this. If at the end of any of these videos you decided you want to use the rig or try it out, just shoot me an email, or if you're my students, just check the resource folder that I've provided, and I will be happy to share it with you. Okay, so I'm just creating additional points so I can protrude the fingertips. All right. Okay, when you click and drag with 3 vertices, all 3 will come out, so you just gotta be careful with that. All right, so I'm gonna fill this hand. Let's find another color here. Okay, fill, there we go. It's a very bright hand. All right, so we have now a drawing of our hand. This is the sketch and the arm. So for simplicity's sake, I don't need this sketch anymore. I'm just going to disconnect it from the composite. Watch what happens in my timeline when I do that. It no longer is visible. So I'm going to push it over to the side here. So the next thing we have to do is I'm going to arrange the arm in front of the hand here. So I'm going to move the arm over here, okay, and I'm going to take this connection from the composite and I'll put it to the left of the composite. So what that does is it shows you the hierarchy. It goes from left to right. So anything above an object is connected to the left of the composite, assuming all Z depths are even, and on the right is what's underneath the other symbol. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is set the pivot points. Sorry, the first thing we're going to do actually is we're going to give it some pegs. So Control P and Control P. Alright, so let's do that again. You're going to highlight the object and hit Control P, and that'll give you the peg. Now if you have multiple symbols, drawing symbols, you can select multiples of them and hit Control Shift P, and that'll give you their individualized pegs. So after you have the pegs, we're going to use the Translate tool to create the pivot points. So first is the arm, and once you are happy with the pivot point position, you're going to hit the Transform tool to set the pivot point. Now if I go down to the drawing, the arm is actually way off here, but the peg of the arm is up there. So I want to have both of them share the same peg. So I'm going to go down to the arm, click on the properties, layer properties, and go under controls and turn off animate using animation tools, and that'll pop my pivot point to where my peg is up here. So I'm going to do the same thing with the hand. Oops, undo. You got to make sure you grab this pivot point right in the middle there, and then you're going to set it like so. Now if I go to my hand peg now, because I animated or I positioned the drawing first, watch what happens when I turn off animation tools. It pops back to the peg. So just note, you always should do the animation the pivot adjustment on the peg, and then you can turn off the animation tools down there. So let's see if this works. Now with the hand, I set the animation tools off first, and yeah, it still worked. Okay, so as long as you set the animation pivot on the peg, and if the animation tools under controls is turned off, then the pivot point should work. Alright, so let me zoom out here, and now if I move the arm peg by shifting up by holding or hitting B to parent up, I can move the arm. But now the hand is disconnected. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to highlight both the arm and the hand, and I'm going to hit Control P. That's going to give it an arm master peg, and I can name it as such. Arm master peg. Okay, now I'm going to change the pivot point of my arm master peg to about there, and I'll set it using the Transform tool. Now when I parent up, I can animate the whole thing. Alright, now I talk a lot about parenting up and down. The main thing to understand is that each one of these selections will give you a different color. If I use my arrow tool and I select something, you'll notice that I have an orange outline box and an orange outline on my drawing. And if you look at my drawing substitution here, if I manipulate the drawing, it's going to manipulate the drawing substitution because I'm using this black arrow tool. If I move the drawing itself and I manipulate just the drawing where the box is magenta using my Transform tool, watch my drawing substitution. I'll do the exact same thing, but nothing will happen, because what I've just done was I've created a key on my drawing. So We don't want that either. What we want is to control the peg. So ensure that, I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see, ensure that when you move the drawing, you're actually moving the peg itself. So as we move here, you'll see it's first magenta, you hit B, and it's yellow. So that'll allow you to move the peg. Now, as good practices go, you should always collapse your main layer and ensure that the first key, or the first frame, you key by hitting F6. I usually like to hit it a bunch of times just to make sure that the program keys everything underneath the layers. Sometimes there are issues. Alright, so now that I have my arm, what I'll do next is I'm going to introduce a simple bone deformer rig. So I'm going to click this tool up here. It's called the rigging tool. It's a hammer and a wrench. Then go under tool properties and click bone and articulation mode. I'm going to go back to node view, and now I'm going to build a bone skeleton for my arm. So I'm going to click from the bicep, then I'll click in the middle, and then I'll click by the wrists. Now if you look at this, it's giving me 3 points. First, the point of origin, the final point, and in the middle you'll see that there is actually a circle that you can expand and contract to dictate the radius of your rotation. So I'm just going to move it to about there. When I'm happy with where things are, you can move this up and down as well. You can set your bone deformer by hitting the transform tool, and now it's set. So now if I move it, I can deform my arm. Okay, I'm just going to hit undo there. Alright, the last thing is now we have to animate it, but the arm disappears. And it's only because if you look carefully, the drawing is not exposed past frame 1. So what you can do is I'm going to collapse this arm here, go to my last frame and hit F5. And that's going to expose all my drawings. Okay? Alright, so let's start animating. So to animate this, I'm going to first set my first key here, and we're going to animate 3 different things. The first animation is the most basic, and it's going to be a 4-step animation process called rest, antic, overshoot, and settle. So my resting position, I'll just leave there, and my antic, I'll put on, say, frame 8. Okay, so my antic, I'm going to just pull the arm back here, bend the arm. Okay, actually I'm going to undo that. Let's F7. Okay, so what I'll do first is whenever I want to explain one thing. When you're moving pieces, the first thing you always want to move is the biggest piece first. So in this case, it's the whole arm. If there was a torso, I would move the torso first. But in this case, just the arm. So I'm going to move the arm. And then I'm going to move the forearm. And then I'll move the hand, if necessary. Now you'll see that the pivot point of the hand is kind of off the pivot now because of our deformer. So if it's in its neutral position, the pivot stays. But when I move this deformer, it's going to throw my pivot position off because it's still remembering this line down here, and that could cause some issues. So to bypass that effect, what you can do is go under node library and grab something called kinematic output. And what this does, you can connect the base to the top here and then the top to the bottom, or you can simply hold down Alt and slide it in. So what that's going to do is that's going to now maintain your pivot point. It basically tells whatever is after the deformation chain to ignore and honor the pivot point below it. So now I have my antic, but now I have to actually reset the first frame. So to reset, you just click on the square and hit reset. So now I have my first and my last. Okay, so just hit F6 again a bunch of times. Like I said, sometimes it didn't register, and on that example there, the deformer didn't register, but now it does. Okay, so there's my first, that's my antic. Now I'm going to go into my overshoot. So here's my overshoot. I'm going to rotate the arm, and I will reset this. Okay. That's my overshoot and my settle. Now my settle is basically like my overshoot. Yeah? So frame 13 to frame 21, they're exactly the same. So what I'll do to adjust my overshoot is I'm going to go back to frame 13, and I'm going to overshoot it a little bit and extend it just a touch. So then that way we get a nice sense of settle from that position. Okay? So we have antic, overshoot, settle. The next thing we do is we're going to tween everything. So highlight the first 3 keys and hit Control K, and that's going to tween everything. Okay? And it'll just stop. Now I'm going to just show you something real quick. If you turn on the onion skin, you'll see that the timing is perfectly even. Now, usually, if you anticipate into something, you want to start quick and slow down into the object. So I'm just going to push things over here, and I'll show you this button called Set Ease for Multiple Parameters. So when you click that, watch what happens here. We are currently on frame 8, as indicated here and here. If you want to slow down into this 8 position from position number 1 to position number 8, you want to slow into frame 8, we're going to put in a number here. So I'll just put in 80, and you'll see that it favors the drawing 80% towards frame 8. So I'm going to put that back to 0, and I'll show you what I mean. So when it's at 0, the drawing is going straight down to the middle completely evenly to frame 8. But I want to slow it down, so I'm going to put a number on the left time ratio, and it slows it down into frame 8. Now if I exit the frame into my overshoot, I'm just going to close that for a second. So this is my overshoot. So it's very even again. Now, if I want to adjust the timing on that, what I'll do is I'll go to the start of this, leading excuse me, into my overshoot. Sorry, I'm just going to extend this timeline by pulling the blue square there. So watch what happens if I put in a really big number here, like 100. It's going to favor the start of frame 8. So it's going to exit frame 8 very slowly, right? So I don't want it to exit that slow, so I'm going to put in a modest number of 20 and see what happens. So here you go. So it starts off slightly slow, and it's fairly even the rest, which is fine. So I'm going to close that. Now we're at our overshoot and our settle. So when we settle, we want things to kind of reach the ending quicker and kind of slow down. So what we'll do here is go to the very last frame and put in, let's say, 70. So we can see it slowing down to the final position. Okay, so now we have our eases in place. Let's have a look. All right. So you can loop this by telling the animation to stop here and then hitting this loop button. All right, so antic, overshoot, settle. Very basic. The next one we're going to do is we're going to do something I like to call push and cushion. So we're going to leave the arm in that position till about frame 30, and I'm just going to move it someplace else, and we'll do another example. In this case, it'll be push and cushion. So the push and cushion is basically two keys. You're going, let's say, from frame 30 to 45, let's say. Okay. Actually, let's undo that. I'm going to let it hold here for a little bit, and I'll actually start my animation on frame 50, just so it doesn't pop and move right away. So it starts from frame 50, and let's say it goes to, okay, see how it stopped the exposure? It's because I extended the timeline and nothing's left. So I'm just going to pull that all the way here and hit F5 at the end to extend the exposure. Alright, so our animation will start on frame 50 and we'll go to frame 64. So this is my final position. Okay, so the push and cushion is essentially just this. I'm going to tween from there to there. Okay, now the only difference is we're going to ease into the final position. Alright, so right now it's very even and kind of boring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ease it into this position by hitting about, let's say, 65. Okay, so it slows down right at the end. But at the start, I don't want it to start off right away either. So I'm going to start off with a 35. So as you can see, it starts off slow, speeds up, and then it's going to slow down again. See? It goes from 35, right? And then it speeds up, and then it slows down here. So what that's going to do is it's going to give us a nice cushion. So I'll start my animation here. I'll stop it here, and I'll just let it loop. Alright? Simple. Okay? Now, there are flourishes to this that you can obviously add. Alright? So, I'm going to do one more, and the next one is basically going to be, I'll start frame 80. Let's go back here. Now this is going to be a combo of the push and cushion and the 4-step animation technique with rest, antic, overshoot, and settle. So in this one, it's very similar to the first one. The only difference is instead of anticing back, let me start the animation from 100, and we'll do an antic to 108. So instead of anticing back like before, just parent up here. Instead of anticing back, we're actually going to antic forward. So I'm going to actually physically move him forward. So just pretend that this is connected to a torso and the character is bending down. Okay, so he's bending down and then he bends back up. And it continues his movement. And this can be reset. Okay, so it goes rest, antic, overshoot, but the antic is pushing forward. So it's a lead in antic, overshoot, and settle. And once again, the overshoot and settle could be just an overextender of this. And the settle, because we're continuing the forward momentum, I'm going to shift it over a little bit. So, okay, so there it is. Now I'm going to key everything, so you can highlight the first 3 keys and Control K. We'll start our animation here and I'll play it for you. Again, it's very even. Alright, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to add some tweens. Actually, I'm going to turn on the onion skin so you can see what's going on. So the first thing we're going to do is, because we're exiting from frame 100 and leading into this lead-in antic, we're actually going to start off slow. So I'm going to start off at, we can even do 40. So when we get to this point, because this is a lead-in antic, we're going to actually just let it go at 0. We don't necessarily want to slow it down unless there's a significant dip. There's not much of a dip here, and as you can see, the arc flows continue. Then you can leave it at 0. Where you would change it is if this arc went down like this and there was a change in direction. Then you would slow it down and then speed it up. But because it's basically straight across, we're going to leave it at 0. When we get to the overshoot, that too can be 0, or you can kind of slow it down just a bit, just to slow it down there. And then we can cushion the overshoot and settle. You can leave it at 0, but you can give it a little softer number. And at the end, this is where we want our big settle. So we'll do 40 or even 60, and we'll close. All right, so let's see what that looks like. All right, so there's your lead-in antic, overshoot, and settle. Alright, so picture a torso bending down, leaning forward. So that's basically it. So those are all 3 varieties. We're going to go into more detail of how to make your animation better and how to build up from these basic steps with animating on 2s, offsetting, delay and drag, and a slew of other cool animation tricks as we go along. Alright, so that's basically it. Actually, you know what? I will show you one cool animation technique here. I'm going to do it on our first move here. So if you want to animate these on 2s, you got to make sure, before I show you the special tool, you want to make sure that your keyframes are on odd frames. So you can do it 2 ways. You can click and drag this over, or you can hit Shift plus. When you hit Shift plus, though, your entire timeline moves as well, so you got to be careful with that. Okay, so that's an odd number, and that's an odd number. So all my keys are at odd numbers. With the folder collapse, I'm going to highlight everything and click this button here. If you don't see it, then just open up this panel until you see everything. So it's this button here, and I'm going to hit a keyframe on 2. So that's already set as a default. I'm going to hit OK, and that's going to hit everything on 2s. Now there is a tween here that's happening. I'm just going to get rid of it by Control L. Okay, I'll stop my animation here. So I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is what it looks like on 2s. It gives it a little bit more weight, I feel anyway, and it feels more classical. Now the next step, if you want to try to push it a little bit more, is we're going to add a little bit of a delay, a little bit of a drag. So as the arm comes back here, I'm going to actually extend my arm, extend my hand here by skewing and squashing and doing what I can to essentially pin the fingers down here. Alright, so as I continue on like this, the fingers will start to get normalized again. Okay. Okay, so on the lead out, what I would do instead is I'm going to bend the hand back. Okay. I might even want to add 1 frame here. Just 1 frame. I'm just going to add 1 frame. Now I know I said on 2s, but sometimes you want to slip in that 1 extra frame as a lead out. It makes a little bit of a difference. Okay. And then I'm going to bend this arm back. Okay, and then here is your overshoot, but your hand is still dragging. Okay. Your hand is super extended now. And it's settling slowly. Okay, and there's a delay here. So the last appendage slows down a few frames later. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Gives it a little bit more life. That drag that I put might be too much here. You can even add a little bit of a squash instead of a drag and skew it like so. This might be too much. There. Alright, let's see what that looks like. Alright, so feel free to play around with that. If you turn on the onion skin, I think I broke an arc here. So you can really get nitpicky with this, but feel free to play around with it until you're happy with what you see. So my arc here, I noticed the finger was a little bit off. It's fine. And now it's fixed. Alright, so there you go. Animating using a arm build. I will drop this arm inside the reuse resource folder. Just file save here. And that's basically it. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email with the screen capture. Otherwise, I will expect this submission for next week, and I'll see you all next week. Have a great night, and just keep watching this video over and over until you get it. Thanks. Thanks for watching Animation Teacher. Good night.